Cold War, episode 293, Ray. At the end of our last episode, we said that Batista did his coup, 10th of March, 1952.
Yeah, knocked out of the
1952, good year for a coup. And Castro wrote a proclamation saying this isn't a revolution, this is a violent attack
Yes.
on the state. This is in a proclamation he wrote, a pamphlet called Revolucion no Zarpazzo.
Right.
A violent swipe by a paw, like from a lion.
Exactly. If I could set up what you're about to say, because you're right, because at least in America, we've been given a skewed version of Castro. And here we are showing, he was helping the poor. He was a political activist. When he became a lawyer, he could have made a shit ton of money. What was he doing? He was helping people, the poorest of the poor, and they were paying him in chickens and eggs and wood, whatever the hell it was. I mean, this guy, he's got a certain track record. And this is going to continue on. He doesn't immediately pick up the gun and start shooting. He's going to take another track. But here's what sets it up. So, and you were touching on this on the end of the last episode. During a public protest, they're at the tomb of Eduardo Chibas, and Castro's up there and he's waving his arms and like he's calling on the people, we need to overthrow Batista by force, which pretty much chills the crowd. There's no way that's going to happen. There's no way they're going to win. They're all going to end up dying. So he reads the room. He's like, nope, I went too far. They're not ready for that. Maybe if they all had guns, maybe, but they know it's not going to happen. So he's not going to be able to do anything. So clearly he has to do something else. Okay, if we're not going to take the guy out, literally rip him out of the seat, how else can I get to this guy? Some other means. And this is going to set up another option for him. But the fact that he thought of something else besides violence belies what I've been taught about him in this country, certainly during the Cold War. Again, this is not the foaming at the mouth, bloodthirsty tyrant that I've been taught to fear growing up in America.
Yeah, as I said at the end of the last episode, his first attempt to play a role in Cuba's political sphere was to run as a candidate. That election got cancelled by Batista's coup.
Right.
And then we will see over the course of this episode his next step. But getting back to his proclamation,
please.
He said this was merely the action of usurpers and adventurers greedy for gold and power. It wasn't an attack against the corrupt government of President Prio Socaris, but an attack on the people on the eve of elections, whose results were sort of known in advance based on the polling that the Orthodox Party was going to win.
Right.
The party of Castro and Eduardo Chibas, who was dead at this point. They were polling very strongly, and that Batista just cancelled the elections to make sure a good government couldn't get into power in Cuba.
Right.
He promised that, as in the past, there would be young men willing to die a martyr's death in the fight against a brutal and oppressive government. He said there was nothing worse for a people than to go to bed free and wake up to slavery.
Ooh, good one. Which is what happened.
So his friends Rodriguez and Eva Jimenez took the proclamation to the newspaper Alerta, which had published a lot of Castro's rants in the past, but they wouldn't publish this because with the suspension of constitutional guarantees by Batista,
right,
they basically figured if they, the owner of the newspaper figured that if they published this, the newspaper would probably just get shut down.
Yeah.
So, unable to find a publisher, Castro decided to print the proclamation himself, like he had done with his campaign pamphlets. And he got help from his brother Raul and a black print worker, Nico Lopez, who had also helped with the mimeographs for the election campaign. And they made 500 copies of the proclamation on a hand-turned mimeograph machine and distributed those. Now, on the 16th of every month, the faithful members of the Orthodox Party met at the grave of Eduardo Chibas.
Right.
And this is what you were referencing earlier, skipping ahead as you often do, because you have a small bladder and you just need to go to the bathroom as quickly as possible. Try to get to the end of the episode.
It's only getting smaller as time goes by. So
those depends only last so long.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm the master of the depends. Master depender. No. Anyway, go on. I've said too much already.
Yeah. The state depender. So on the 16th of March, 6 days after the revolution or the coup,
right,
Castro and his friends gathered, and he used it as an opportunity to hand out copies of his proclamation. The Orthodox Party leader, Agramonte, restated while they were there that the struggle against Batista would be non-violent, and Castro jumped on a tomb
right,
and started giving an angry speech. He said that Batista had taken power by force. He needed to be thrown out by force. Some of the people in the crowd were cheering him on, and he thought he might, have a base of people to go with him to, overthrow this whole thing by force. Yeah. But really, most of them dwindled away. People weren't ready to take arms up against a military occupation. The people weren't ready. And one of the things that is very true about revolutions, people's revolutions, is for them to succeed, you need to have trained the people. They need to be not only trained in military tactics and strategy, but they need to be trained to believe in the need for a military revolution.
Right.
They need to be they need to be trained to think politically and to think militarily.
Yeah.
To realize that the only way for them to get their freedom is force. And this is going to be the journey that Castro will go on for the next 7 years, basically, is gearing up Cuba for a military revolution to overthrow the Batista regime.
Yeah.
But at this point, the people aren't ready. And, in some ways, as I said in the last episode, after people have lived through corrupt governments for long enough, they become apathetic and sort of resigned to the fact that, there's always going to be corruption. All the parties are corrupt. All the politicians are corrupt. And this is not just true in places like Cuba in the early 20th century, but as I said in the last episode, in most modern democracies. Today, there's a high degree of apathy. I see it all the time on Reddit and Facebook and Twitter. People are just like, you know what? Both parties are corrupt. Both major parties are all as bad as each other. It doesn't really matter who's in power. They're all corrupt. And I admit that I've felt the same way for a long time. The system is the problem.
Right.
It's not this politician or that politician. The system is the problem. As George Carlin said 20 years ago, maybe longer.
Right.
There's only one political party, and it's the big business party, and there are two branches, right? And they don't care about you.
Exactly. And it doesn't pay.
You're not
right.
You're not part of it.
Exactly. You're just a cog. Yeah.
This feeling of resignation and apathy, Castro and Chibas had helped create this mood for years. They'd run these campaigns of vilification against the Prio government, how corrupt it was,
right,
and how the whole political setup in Cuba was corrupt. It was riddled with nepotism and fraud and violence and injustice and corruption and dishonest patronage. The Americans were part of the problem. It was all corrupt. So now Batista has said he's come in and swept away the corrupt politicians, as Chibas and Castro had said needed to be done.
Right.
So, but now Castro is trying to say, well, yeah, he did it, but he did it the wrong way. I mean, it's
right.
Yeah, we wanted to get rid of the corrupt government, but not by replacing them with another corrupt government. But it's a hard message to sell.
Yeah.
When you've been saying for years, you got to get rid of this government, and then a guy comes in and gets rid of the government. You go, no, not him.
Right.
That's
right. So it's almost like
he's just as bad, but
right. So the messenger, the message, and the target are not lining up yet. It's just not there. And you said something, I thought you were going to say the exact opposite. When you said Castro was pointing out the corruption, I thought you were going to say, well, at least he's doing something about it. He's pointing out the corruption, but then you twisted it. Here's a guy and others who's pointing out the corruption. The corruption never seems to change. It certainly never goes away. And whoever comes into office next is just as bad as the last guy. So are you saying like inadvertently, Castro was like almost getting the people to believe, corruption, that's just the way it is. I literally thought you were going to go the other way, but I just found that interesting that you said that. So if I complain over and over again and nothing ever changes, people are going to go, yeah, that's the way it is. What are you going to do? And so they don't think they can or should do anything.
I think they're just, here's the problem. I think when you're trying to build a revolution, a genuine revolution, it's not enough to point out what's wrong about the current government.
Right.
You need to build a vision for what needs to replace it.
Exactly.
And I think this has been one of the problems with the left, so-called left, in modern democracies for a long time. You take the Democrats as an example. They'll tell you till the cows come home about all the problems with the Republicans.
Yeah.
But what are they going to replace it with? Well, there's no real
got nothing
vision for what the good government is going to do.
It's not that. We don't know.
They're going to play around the edges.
Yeah.
Tinker. Yeah, a little bit more health care, a little bit more.
But basically,
this, a little bit more of that.
We'll be less.
A little bit of a pay rise.
We'll be less cunty. How is that? Is that enough? Is that no? Oh, you're not going to vote for us?
Yeah. There's not a clear articulation of a dramatically different way of doing things.
Yeah.
That gives, you got to build people a vision for a better world. They need to be sold on a positive vision, not on, well, these guys are a little bit worse than we are. It's a very hard sell. And I think that's the problem with Castro having pointed out that the Prio government was corrupt. He hasn't yet got to the point where he's articulating a clear vision for how he could do it better, what a well-run Cuba would look like.
Right. He's just pointing out a problem.
So, pointing out a problem is not enough.
Exactly.
You need to have a clear articulation of what the better world would look like.
Right.
And, if you go back to socialism in Russia before the 1917 revolution, decades had been spent in trying to build and articulate a vision for what a socialist country would look like.
Mm-hmm.
What the freedoms would be. And again, you got to remember that this is in a Russia that had been basically a feudal country for as long as anyone could remember, for centuries. Had basically just started to move out of serfdom, which was glorified slavery anyway.
Right.
And so they were trying to articulate what a better world would look like. And that was why they were able to gradually build up support in the masses for socialism. People realizing that there could be freedom to work, and that money could be distributed more equally, and control over land and control over capital and property and that sort of thing.
Well, you make a good point. We're not just fighting against something, we're fighting towards something that's much more powerful, much more tangible, or whatever the word I'm looking for. Yeah, it's like, that I can get behind. Visceral, something like that.
The communists, so keeping in mind, in Cuba at the time, there was a communist party.
Mm-hmm.
They were fairly ineffective, but they were at least more consistent than Castro was at this stage.
Right.
They condemned the coup, but said it represented no real change from the previous system of corrupt government.
Yeah.
But it was their sort of low-key reaction was seen by some as a signal that they were willing to cooperate with Batista, as they had done a decade earlier.
Right.
when he had come into power the first time, the communists, again, maybe they just felt that they weren't ready. Maybe they were just ineffective. I think a problem with a lot of the socialist and communist organizations in the 20th century, and this was sort of the Bolsheviks' view of the Mensheviks in 1917, 18, and even before that, before the revolution, was they were just talkers.
Yeah.
They were intellectuals. They were talkers. They, were willing to cooperate with the capitalists. They were willing to cooperate with the existing bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
They had this idea of slow change over time, whereas the Bolsheviks, and at this point, and rapidly Castro, was like, no, we don't have time to wait another 50 years.
Exactly.
We need to, because there is the view, and this was certainly Lenin's view and Trotsky, and rapidly becomes Castro's view, is there is no slow path to revolution.
Ooh, I like
because
that.
the capitalists will always crush it.
Right.
The people, the bourgeoisie with the money and the power, and they control the media, and they control the military, and they control the police, and they control the education system.
Yeah.
They control the commerce system. They control incomes and jobs and businesses.
Status quo.
And the political system, they will always find ways to subvert reform through, various levels of means. The view of Trotsky later on, before he was ice-picked in Mexico, when he was writing books about fascism, was that fascism is what capitalism turns into when the bourgeoisie feel like they're losing control of the people through their normal mechanisms of control, is using the media, using the education system, using economics to control the people. When the people are starting to get more militant about the need for economic and social reform, that's when you need to go to the fascist side of the right, where you need to crush the left using violence and cracking down and suspending habeas corpus and suspending constitutional guarantees and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there are levels of mechanisms that the capitalists have available to them to crush dissent. On the lower end of things, it's just using the regular tools, the Overton window of allowable discussion, using propaganda, etc., to keep the people in line, and right through to the more violent end of the spectrum. And so the view of the more militant socialists is that, well, if you understand that there is no way that slow, gentle reform is ever going to work, at some point you're going to have to fight force with force.
Right. What are we going to?
And we might as well do it now.
Right. What are we going to do? Don't talk about it. A revolution. It should be not unlike sex with me, short and sharp, and net satisfying. Hopefully, I don't really care about that part. No, but you're right. I mean, you can't.
Where's the sharp bit?
How quickly I'm out of there. Anyways, so.
Okay.
No, but you're right. I mean, I think he comes to this realization, and cut me off if you haven't gotten to this yet. But at the beginning of this episode, we were talking about, he's talking about, we've got to take the son of a bitch down. And people are like, no. So he's going to bring up some legal cases against the government. And if Batista had been found guilty on all of the charges that he had, the laws that he had broken in the coup in the first place, he would have spent at least 100 years in jail. I mean, he just literally trumped everything. He just broke all the, because that's what a coup is a complete breakdown of laws. And so somewhere along the way, Castro's like, well, the people aren't ready. I can't take him to court because he's got all the power, all the things that you listed. It has to be literally by another means, a more direct, a more sharp, intense, actionable means. And I think he's like kind of getting there in his head. But like you said, the people aren't ready to hear this. He's going to be on a whole nother journey trying to get himself and the people ready for something that they, I guess, really don't want to do. And that's take the fight to the power.
Before we get to that, I want to give some of the New York Times coverage of the coup.
Right.
On March 11th, the day after the coup,
Right.
this is the New York Times' coverage. In a broadcast from Camp Columbia tonight, General Batista accused Dr. Prio Socarros of planning to create chaos by gangster action in order to suspend the presidential election scheduled for next June 1st and to establish a dictatorship April 15th. General Batista said the Prio Socarros regime had become convinced its candidate, former President Carlos Evia, an Annapolis graduate, could not win, and the government leaders were planning a series of murderous attacks against opposition chiefs.
Right.
Evia had been the first Cuban national to graduate from the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. He was a member of the class of 1920. General Batista, who served as president of Cuba from 1940 to 1944 after ruling the island as a strongman from 1933, was the presidential candidate of the Unitary Action Party he organized several years ago. Political observers had lately been considering Dr. Evia as having the best chance of winning the three-cornered fight for the presidency. Not true. It was really the Orthodox Party that was probably in the lead, but that aside.
Right.
In his broadcast, General Batista declared he had been forced to carry out the coup. Forced to carry out the coup because of his love of the people and to re-establish public order. He asserted, "No one can accuse me of a desire for revolution or ambition for power." He eulogized the armed forces, whose salaries he raised as one of his first administrative acts. He promised guarantees to all persons and vowed he would wipe out gangsterism. Capital and labor will get fair treatment, he declared, and all of Cuba's international agreements and obligations will be respected.
That's for the business community, right? Yeah. We're still going to get paid.
And the American community.
And the American, exactly. And he mentioned something about is going to stop the communist influence. Again, he's telling the Americans everything they want to hear.
So what's interesting to me in this is, again, something that we see a lot when you study 20th century history, is how the American media is depicting a coup run by somebody who's favorable to U.S. interests.
Softly. Yes.
Putting a positive spin on it, you know,
right.
and also carrying Batista's claims that Prio Socarros was going to establish a dictatorship and carry out a series of murderous attacks on opposition chiefs. There's no counterpoint. There's no fact-checking. There's no neutral, covering of the other side. And there's no mention of the fact that there's no evidence to support this.
Yeah.
It's providing a biased narrative supporting what would be the U.S. preferred view. I mean, the U.S. loved Batista the first time around because he was very pro-U.S., very pro-U.S. capital. So this is a template that not only you see play out during 20th century history. You know, we talked about this in the coverage of Mossadegh and the coup in Iran, the US CIA's coup in Iran in the 50s.
Right.
You see it again rolling out here. And by the way, just to, point out the timeline here, this is 1952.
Ooh.
The coup in Iran happens in 1953, led by the CIA.
Yeah. Korean War.
Which, with very, very similar tactics in the way that it rolls out. But also in terms of the way the US corporate media depicts what was happening in these countries.
Right.
You know, in this case, Batista creates all of these false accusations against the Prio government. In the case of Iran in 1953, the same sort of false accusations against Mossadegh. He was going to do a violent coup supported by the communists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all completely made up. Completely fraudulent.
Right.
But this is the paper of record. The New York Times and all the US media was doing the same thing, and the mainstream corporate media.
Right.
Carrying this very flavored narrative. And then you see that. That's why when I read the coverage of the New York Times when Castro died, and we did a few episodes on it, their coverage of Putin and Ukraine over the last few years, it's the same sort of it's the US official narrative that they're covering. There's no
Right.
genuine attempts at a balanced narrative here. It's always been, going back to the 50s, and it's true today.
Yeah.
There's a flavor to the narrative that tells you one side of the story, one version of the events, which is why you can't take the New York Times or any mainstream media seriously if you're trying to get international coverage of international events where there's an American interest at play, and there usually is. Right?
They're going to tell the lie. Yeah.
They're part of the mechanism of. That's what I said before about part of the mechanism of the control of the people.
Mm-hmm.
Is
the press,
the propaganda that's contained within the media.
Absolutely.
The U.S. media is owned directly or indirectly, always by very wealthy individuals. They're either direct owners, like a Rupert Murdoch,
right,
or a Jeff Bezos, or they're owned by large corporate interests via shareholdings, large funds, big investments in the large funds, the funds that own the papers, et cetera, et cetera.
The right kind of people. Now, when Batista cuts relations with the Soviet Union, again, that's something that the New York Times and other papers can tell truthfully. They can pretend not to gloat about it, or maybe they do gloat about it. I don't know. But again, when you have a truthful thing, you sprinkle that in there with everything else. But you're right, there's no fact checking. There's no he went in the middle of the night and seized everything. They don't cover that stuff. Maybe they don't know it, but they didn't investigate it. They're just giving here's the thing that happened. It's pretty good for America, so we're going to go along with it. We're not going to bash it over the head like we could if there was someone else that we didn't like who did the same exact thing.
Which we will see when Castro takes over 6 years later, 7 years later.
Right.